Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dice Towers, or Chris Yee's from the Dice Towers top 100 albums of all time. This time I'm going to be doing just 10 albums focusing on my number 20 through my number 11. As recommended, why not just kind of break these into separate videos so I have a little more time to kind of address them without feeling like I got to rush through them, but also not make the video overly long. These are some of the best albums ever made, but there's one thing I want to clarify. In a previous video, I had stated that I was excited Billy Joel had written some new music, and I was under the impression that he had put out a new album. What the notification was that Spotify has a new release listed under him, which is a historical bit of like compilation. You can hear different session recordings and different takes and stuff on various songs throughout his career. Turn the Lights Back On is a wonderful single, but it sounds like there's not an entire album in the works. So I did misspeak. I was probably corrected in the comments as I'm recording all of these ahead of time, but I wanted to make sure to throw that out there. Folks, I'm now going to start with my number 20 favorite album, going to go from 20 to 11. There's so many good ones. I said in a previous section that I didn't include anything like live albums and whatnot, because several of my favorite live albums would probably be in this range, so I want to focus on studio stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. Everything Goes Numb by Streetlight Manifesto to me is just a perfect sign that young people full of angst and full of energy need to write music. This album is through and through just amazing. I was introduced to this from a former girlfriend who was a jazz saxophone player, and you can tell why this is a band that she would absolutely love. They're clearly very well trained. They're super talented musicians, all of them, the whole bunch. I believe there's actually a big lineup change after this album that several of the members actually kind of stayed pretty steady from the next album onward. This is Streetlight Manifesto's debut album, though several of the band members were carryovers from Catch-22, and earlier on the list you heard the album Keysby Nights, which was Streetlight Manifesto's re-recording of an earlier album by Catch-22. It's all just very I feel like the ska scene and the Swedish death metal scene. Everyone's been in every band ever. But this whole album, starting from the opening track, Everything Went Numb, all the way through to the end, has just such great artistry and craftsmanship to it, despite the fact that Thomas Kalnaki, I assume the band leader, maybe is a safe way to say it, I believe he's a lead songwriter, lead vocalist, guitarist. He was 23 years old at this time. He was 18 when Keysby Nights was first released. And there's just a lot of great topics covered in here. Loss and sadness, and clearly the last closing track being called The Big Sleep. Young people need to write music because there's some beauty that comes from being fresh and inexperienced to some degree. Having experience, but being less experienced than, say, being in your 50s. And those perspectives are very different when you hear, later career music versus early career music. And so The Big Sleep is his take on death and loss and sadness and everything. And it's just so raw and so cool. Moment of Silence and A Moment of Violence are two tracks, one right after the other, that are kind of these a slower and then a more aggressive version of like the same motif, the same theme. It's a great point counterpoint. Hey, look, there's a track in the album called Point Counterpoint. This whole thing is just so well done that it kind of supersedes just like ska music, right? Is it ska? Yeah, but also is it something more? Yes, and I think that's such a great start of Streetlight Manifesto proper's career. And while I think that somewhere in the between, and you could maybe argue some of their albums since are stronger albums, this is one that I still love so much, in part because of that freshness to it. So anyway, wonderful album. So happy I was introduced to it many years ago, and still love it now. come on, it's Iron Maiden. This is my favorite Iron Maiden album, and in some ways this could maybe swap places with Peace of Mind, maybe not. But the theatricality, the booming entrance of Bruce Dickinson as lead singer of Iron Maiden, just it was such a perfect moment. It was such a fantastic, and then Paul Di'Anno is a great singer and a great frontman for the early two Iron Maiden albums. But there's no way that they would become the band that they were, recognized internationally, so famous without Bruce Dickinson. But that being said, you can still hear in this album some of that early Iron Maiden kind of sound to them, right, with Invaders and stuff. But by the time you get to some of these tracks, like I think especially 22 Acacia Drive and The Prisoner, you hear Bruce just breaking through and really elevating Iron Maiden as a band. And then you get to the back half of the album, and holy smokes, this album goes from like great Iron Maiden album to iconic, legendary, just unbelievable. The whole horror aspect of it and the teasing with controversy a little bit, right? But just the storytelling that is and forever will be part of Iron Maiden's catalog comes so strongly. That imagery, that iconography that they're known for, in many ways really stems from this album. There's just no way that you can undersell that, really. Run to the Hills, Gang, Hallowed Be Thy Name, just the operatic and grandiose nature of it all makes it such a good album. So fun to still listen to all the way through. Anyway, Number of the Beast, number 19.
Baby, you can drive my car. Nowhere, man, can you see me? And there are places I remember.
There's different takes on what's, everyone's favorite Beatles album, and for me, there's no doubt that it's Rubber Soul. I think that there's a lot of great albums of theirs, especially like the late career stuff. I love early career Beatles. Some of the middle stuff, as they really get into the psychedelia and weirdness and stuff, hey, very good, right? But Rubber Soul stands as this perfect crossroads when the band had kind of evolved from the early, I Want to Hold Your Hand, She Loves You, yeah, 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 that type of stuff. And before it got really into, it's like Sgt. Pepper's Magical Mystery Tour, that type of the more psychedelia stuff. This is kind of where they first branched beyond that. There are still plenty of songs about love and people together and stuff, but there's just definitely a different element to it, different perspectives of the songwriting, the storytelling, the lyrically and everything, but also the actual writing of the music has gotten more mature. And there's really cool experimentation with dissonance and with influence from the time that the Beatles spent in the United States. And so there's Motown records, there's more soul influence here, a little bit of country western, even with like the closing track, Run for Your Life, right? Told from a very kind of a love or like a desire, but also kind of a controlling type of love. It's an interesting story told through the music that, taken out of context, is bad, right? But anyway, that's the type of album that this is. It's experimental in a lot of great ways, and yet still so approachable. Drive My Car and Nowhere Man are these songs that are so fun and so enjoyable, and just written with a higher, just like a higher level of songwriting interest, making music that is elevated a little bit. You listen to In My Life, one of the most nostalgic tracks ever, and it has this Baroque-esque piano interlude played throughout it, and it feels nostalgic. It leans into that, and it's definitely, I've used this word a lot of times describing bands and stuff, the maturation of their sound, maturing and growing, and I think that this still stands as my favorite, probably the best Beatles album. I know people love White Album, people love Abbey Road, and people have all their different favorites, but this one is hands down my favorite. I think that it's the perfect fulcrum point between early and late Beatles career. So good. I love Rubber Soul. 18.
Only place I had to
I am a unabashed huge fan of Ozzy Osbourne, and I think that his album Diary of a Madman is a fantastic second solo career album. After he had departed ways with Black Sabbath, and he started, he made his first debut album, Blizzard of Oz. Diary of a Madman is a follow-up to that, and I think it's just tremendous. It's so good. This is unfortunately Randy Rhoads' last album performing with Ozzy before his tragic death quite early in life. But you can tell that Randy Rhoads was just this amazing. He had a great ear for heavy metal. He had a great ear for classical, and he was able to merge those. And that's just like, that for me is such a sweet spot, a huge influence on my own guitar stylings and the guitarist I wanted to become because of listening to stuff like this. The almost operatic, the grand orchestral nature of the title track Diary of a Madman, but then also just great rock tracks from start to finish. Over the Mountain, Flying High Again is one of the coolest, most impressive guitar solos out there. But all of the work on this album is so good. So good. Tonally and recording quality wise, they step up from the previous album and everything. And just so sad to me at the same time that the collaboration between Ozzy and Randy Rhoads was as short-lived as it was, unfortunately, due to tragedy mostly. But man, what an influential album for the way that I love and approach music. So yeah, Diary of a Madman, fantastic. And earlier when I talked about No More Tears, I didn't mean to imply by any means that there was no Bark at the Moon album, no Jake E. Lee era between these two, but there's no doubt that Randy Rhoads and Zakk Wylde have both been iconic in their collaborations with Ozzy and made some of just the most influential music out there. If nothing else, influential for me, so that's why Diary of a Madman's up here. The Wall by Pink Floyd is an amazing double album. I find personally that many double albums are good, perhaps a little bit overstuffed. I mean, even Metallica's Hardwired and the Beatles' White Album, I find many just like great tracks on there, and then some good stuff in between. And did it have to be a double album? Well, in the case of The Wall, absolutely. There's an unbelievable amount of great tracks on here, and the storytelling of this from the beginning, just a troubled person building slowly bricks in the wall, isolating themselves from the world, all the way the different journeys they go through, the abuse, whether external or internally forced upon themselves, and then the idea of trying to break free from that when you get to the final tracks here, the trial, the person putting themselves against this judge and jury of himself, and just the musical theater, rock opera-esque, boldness of that is just impressive. And then the kind of ends with this Outside the Wall, and it has this great little thing where the if you loop the end of the last track back to the beginning of the first track, it has this continuity to it, kind of the cyclical nature of human nature and everything, right? But there's just so many of these like absolutely amazing songs. The Wall Part 2, Happiest Days of Our Lives, Into Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, iconic, right? Absolutely. But then even the lesser known tracks, the ones that don't necessarily get huge radio play and everything, are just phenomenal. Mother, Goodbye Blue Sky. I could just list off all the tracks on here. I won't, right? But this is one of those albums that 100%, if you really want to experience it, block off some time, listen through the whole thing, just appreciate it as music, as this whole journey. Yeah, I mean, sure, if it's easier for you to sit down and maybe do the dishes, do some chores while listening to it, but try to listen to it with a bunch of intentionality, because it's so good, so iconic, and the tracks that you've heard from it, phenomenal, but the whole experience of it is just wonderful. So yeah, The Wall.
Generals gathered in their masses. I can see the things that make true
The MCU wouldn't be what it is without Iron Man and Ozzy in a large way, as well as AC/DC. But Paranoid is it's I don't know, it's just hands down one of the most important albums ever made. The original Black Sabbath album, great. Started the whole career of, and in many ways set the trajectory of metal. But without the follow-up album Paranoid, and without this album's huge success and huge influence, that first Black Sabbath album would be a great one, no doubt. But this is the one that really just kind of broke through and made the big splash, the lasting splash at least. Is a little basic, so to speak, to say this is one of my favorite albums of all time. Sure is. Who cares? That's because it's great. From that, just from the opening of War Pigs, right? Just that two note, dun, right? That motif. It's so simple. It's almost like Beethoven's Fifth. Dun, 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 dun. You just repeat that a bunch of times, but it gets you into this idea, this groove. You know exactly what it's trying to do. And as the song develops, and then as it goes into this big, chaotic, huge growth, and then it just cuts back to dun-dun, you're like, oh, yes. That motif is so satisfying to come back to. And Ozzy's very powerful vocals filling in those spaces in the between. What a great opening track. Paranoid. The track was the last written for the album. It almost wasn't going to be on there. They had written the whole album, and the producers and them kind of felt like, well, we could put another track on there. And they jammed it out in about 2 hours, just like, from 2 hours, beginning to end, song written, song made. And then it became one of the most iconic songs. It became the closer for so many of Ozzy's concerts. It became just this calling card track. And they weren't used to writing a 2-minute 48-second song. You can see most of the tracks on here are like at least 6, 7, 8 minutes. Black Sabbath makes these huge, long, just grandiose kind of things, right? Iron Man, the classic track that everyone knows them for, is almost 6 minutes long. And so to write this like wild radio hit that just kind of defined their careers, sort of not by accident, but by incident, is so cool. The whole track through, Fairies Wear Boots as a closer, Electric Funeral. Yeah, Planet Caravan's kind of a bore sometimes. You got to kind of really get in the mood for it, right? But nonetheless, this album is just unbelievable. The album was also originally called War Pigs because that is such a great stand-up song from it, which makes the cover make a little bit more sense as opposed to Paranoid. But they didn't have time to change the album cover. They didn't want to. They thought, no, this is a winner right here. Dude in a weird He-Man-esque costume with a blue laser sword in the forest. But anyway, nonetheless, despite that, Paranoid. In Flames has made my my list of favorite albums several times so far, and Colony is no exception to that. This is their fourth album. This is the first album that kind of entered their classic lineup, so to speak. In the previous albums, their drummer, Bjorn, he was on drums, and he switched over to guitar, and they brought in a new drummer, they brought in a new bassist, and the five of them just really clicked and just... I don't know. It entered a little different of a sonic era. In this is a 1999 album, and the five of them together on this album had a lot of those elements of the previous albums. You can still hear some of that, especially in like Zombie Inc. and some of the large walls of harmonized guitar, beautiful melodies, along with the gruff, growling death metal vocals and stuff. But just what a treat this whole album is, and especially if you are a longtime fan, or if you know the discography and the catalog, you can hear these elements of change in the songwriting and the sound that In Flames projected, and you can hear elements that kind of led them to Reroute to Remain, Soundtrack to Your Escape, those types of that era, that later era of In Flames, but still has it still rings true a lot to the original stuff. Man, this is a great album. I like that they re-recorded, for example, Behind Space from their album Lunar Strain, beefed it up a little bit, but mostly original stuff. You heard that acoustic track there in the in that little sizzler, the bumper at the front here, Power Anders Visa. Just it's really cool that they have so much folk music influence in their death metal catalog, and that part obviously is like very obvious and stuff, right? But throughout the rest of the music, you hear that influence, that sense of melody that for me really elevates death metal kind of music. So yeah, Colony, 1999, so good. Ghost is one of those weird bands. Man, I really like them, but they're not afraid to be a metal band, but also be heavily influenced by bands like ABBA and Foreigner and other like kind of like arena rock and some of that type of stuff. It's great. And this album, Impera, leans into that like 80s, 70s, 80s kind of like arena rock type stuff, a little bit of glam, a little bit of just... yeah, like Foreigner, right? Like clearly one of the tracks in here, Spillways, is not uninspired by tracks like, You're as cold as ice, but done obviously with that touch that Tobias Forge brings to Ghost, right? It's a sonic change, right? It's a sound change, but I think it's not done in a way that sounds insincere. And this whole album has this kind of theme of one of the great lyrics in Kaiserion. They usually have like a kind of an intro track that's not really a song per se, and that's what Imperium is, and it goes into Kaiserion. There's a great line about we're building a new empire on the ashes of an old, and that's kind of what this whole thing is thematically. I love, but I love it. It's funny. It has this kind of like retro modern kind of feel to it. There's a track called 20s. Is it talking about the 2020s in which this album was released just a few years ago, or is it talking? It has this kind of feel of like, are we going back to the 1920s? What 20s are we talking about? And that's obviously done very intentionally. Many of the problems of the past are still the problems of the present and everything. Anyway, so it's great. Ghost is one of those bands that when they really want to, they can sound metal and sludgy in all the best ways, like Black Sabbath, with tracks like Call Me Little Sunshine and whatnot off of this. But then they can also be goofy and silly, and they're not afraid to do that, right? They're not afraid to have some of these tracks that just are danceable and like I said, very ABBA inspired, and that's great. Watcher in the Sky has some of the coolest guitar work and everything. Anyway, this whole album, also to be said, the artist who does their album covers, or at least has for the last 3 or so, let's see if I can pronounce it correctly, Zbigniew Bielak. Such cool stuff. It really defines kind of their look and their tone in a lot of ways. So anyway, Impera, a phenomenal recent album from Ghost.
Mr. Crowley.
If I said that Diary of a Madman was super influential, Ozzy Osbourne and Randy Rhoads together started the solo career, then Blizzard of Oz is even more so. This is an album that just, it defines in many ways Ozzy's solo career. Yes, the song Crazy Train is from here. Everyone knows Crazy Train. Whether you are aware of what it is or not, you've heard it somewhere. Whether it's the Blue Man Group parodies it, right? They play it on the tubes. Dun dun. Dun 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 dun. Right, everyone knows that really gripping. Well, and then when the Blue Man Group does it, they hit the vibra slap, and it just keeps vibrating forever. Wonderful, wonderful gimmick, right? How much metal can you say out there uses the vibra slap? Right, Ozzy's not afraid to, and so yeah, it's great. What a wonderful album, right? Not afraid to be a little bit silly, a little bit weird, and at the same time, just so iconic. Everything about this album, it just screams what I love and what I look for in so many ways, right? Just a great sense of music theory and understanding and influence beyond just one single thin little genre. It's metal, right? Of course it is. But also, what are tracks like Crazy Train with all this stuff, but also, Goodbye to Romance. On Ozzy's breakout, I'm forging my own solo career kind of thing. He has this really lovely, kind of sappy little ballad, followed up by D, a 50-second long acoustic classical guitar track laid down by Randy Rhoads, followed by Suicide Solution, a very controversial track, right? It's clearly about alcohol. It's clearly about how bad alcohol is for you. Just listen to any of the lyrics. And yet, yes, Ozzy's no foreigner to controversy and stuff, right? But I mean, Mr. Crowley is just such a haunting, great track. Yeah, that's metal. And then you go to Revelation Mother Earth, and it's just this. It is kind of that big, epic orchestral track, right? In the way that Diary of a Madman is on the second album. Wonderful, underrated track. If you've never listened to this, you should. The biggest downside to it might be just the production quality, the budget, the mix of everything is, it could be a little bit better. This was 1980. This was the start of Ozzy's solo career, right? So yeah, if it was produced just a little bit tighter, it could even be more epic and everything. But you should listen to Revelation Mother Earth. Such a cool, dark, wild, apocalyptic kind of song. Not afraid to, just once again, not afraid to be influenced by more than just the little narrow field of the genre of music that you're in. So anyway, my long diatribe of why Blizzard of Oz, one of my favorite, just one of the best albums of all time. And now let's cut to something very different. Very different from anything else that's been on my top 100, but this album here, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, American Folk Hymns and Spirituals. Such a long album. I've never remembered to say the entire thing correctly. This is from the Tabernacle Choir for my church, the LDS Church, right? Formerly called the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and now called the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square. So this album came out in 2009. It was a very important, pivotal year in my life. And this album accompanied me through just a huge time of spiritual growth and huge journey for me. And it was just the perfect album. This has I previously had on my albums list the soundtrack to Over the Garden Wall. Has a lot of great Americana folk music and stuff behind it. And this is kind of a lot of that, right? Older spirituals and American folk hymns and whatnot. And these are some of the best arrangements of them on the face of the planet. Mac Wilberg, who is the choir director, he's also an incredibly accomplished composer and arranger. And these tracks, there's just no better versions of them, in my opinion, right? Which almost never needs to be stated. But some of them are actually straight up Moses Hogan arrangements, of fantastic African-American spirituals arranger and composer. So some of those tracks are just, let's see, Battle of Jericho, for example. If you ever want to hear a choir just, this is like American folk metal before that existed kind of a thing, right? Battle of Jericho is just baller of a track. But there are so many beautiful tracks on here, slow, melodic, incredibly just uplifting, interspersed with cool tracks that sound like pirate music, and just like the whole, just that optimistic American spirit. It's so good. It's so good. If you are looking at all for a religious, uplifting, spiritual kind of album, this is 100% it, right? Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, Amazing Grace. Some of these are just classics that are incredibly well known. But maybe you've never heard tracks like Saints Bound for Heaven, We'll Shout and Give Him Glory, Saints or Bound for the Promised Land. Bound for the Promised Land is the one that I was joking earlier. It has kind of this pirate lilt to it, and it's so cool, right? You could either hear yourself like being very spiritually uplifted by it, or wanting to go raid an enemy ship. It's it's so great, right? Alex Boyer's performance, his solo performance on "I Want Jesus to Walk with Me," is so soulful and so sincere, and it's just, I love this album. Like I said, it's interspersed between like the bombastic, huge arrangements, "Down to the River to Pray," featured in the a different version of that song featured in "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou." Once again, this arrangement of it is just. Mac Wilbrick's a master of it. The choir is a 300-something member choir, so it's big, it's full. And then they'll sing something like "Softly and Tenderly," and it is exactly that. It's soft, it's tenderly, it's wonderful. It's this beautiful blend of all of these just American, just very American folk music and that 1800s kind of era of songs that is something that I think is, I don't know, important. It's important musically. It has a rich part of the history of that era, and I think that some of the best stuff has come out in that time, and these are some of the best arrangements of that whole genre of music. So there you go. That's 20 through 11 here, and wow, I really went long on some of these, but I got a lot to say about these, and I'll have a lot to say about my 10 through 1. So, folks, if you enjoyed that, I really hope that you did. That is, that's my look there. One last video that will be coming out, and that's 10 through 1. So many good albums, great albums left to talk about. So, folks, thanks for coming out to this one. My name is Chris Yee. Take care.
Hey, thanks for watching another video here on the Dice Tower. We really appreciate you stopping by and checking our things out. Thanks so much for joining us today. And hey, if you really like what we're doing here at the Dice Tower, then there are different ways to support the Dice Tower. One of those ways is through Patreon. We have links in the description to this video, and we have links to lots of other things we do down there, so definitely check it out. But either way, we're glad you watched us. Tell your friends about the Dice Tower. Until next time, though, I'm Tom Vassell, and I hope you enjoyed this video.